All right, here we are, episode 3 of the Camp series. Episode 1, we touched on credible accounts with one balance. Episode 2, dove into Magic Spend Plus Plus with Socket and Zero Dev. Now we're moving a little bit further down the stack. Today, with episode 3, we're here with Connor from Enso Finance and VC returning from episode 2 to join us here today from Socket Protocol. And as always, we have our CTO, Jasper, joining us as well. GM to all three of you. We'll start, as we always start, let's do a round of introductions. Sorry, getting pinged on the side here. Connor, since it's your first time on the Camp series, let's start with you. Let's hand the mic over, a little introduction to yourself and what you guys are doing over at Enso Finance.
Thanks for having me on today. So I'm Connor Howe, one of the co-founders of Enso. I've been building full-time in the Ethereum ecosystem since 2016. You can envision Enso as a developer tool that enables people to build applications very quickly. Now, the narrative of this is called intents. How does this allow people to build applications quickly? Before using Enso, you'll need to build every single integration to every single smart contract and every single blockchain framework manually one by one yourself. Now with Enso, you can simply express what outcome you would like to obtain, whether that's a token, a DeFi position, an NFT position, or any outcome state that's from a smart contract itself. Currently, we are in production with the centralized version. The centralized version in the last year has enabled over $12 billion to be settled on chain. And now we're slowly but surely decentralizing the stack to kind of have more people contribute to the Enso network. Yeah, looking forward to today's discussion.
And just to clarify too, you're actually well into production, right? Because a lot of people have misconception that you guys are relatively new to the space, having like a recent token launch and everything going on there, but you guys have been in production for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Enso was born about 3.5 years ago. We pivoted 2 times. We were a social trading product. We found it very difficult to integrate all of DeFi. We built all of the infrastructure underneath to enable us to, integrate a new DeFi protocol within 30 minutes because DeFi was fast. We then used this infrastructure on a DeFi super app. Didn't really find product market fit on that one, but other people said, hey, we have the same issue as you did in version 1 is how do we integrate all of DeFi into our product? So we spun up an API within the first 2 weeks, and then the first week we had 11 million volume. So it's been this natural progression of we had the problem and we solved the problem for ourselves, and then we really realized that other people had the same problem, so we can solve the problem as well.
That sounds very familiar. Exactly. Yeah, I was about to say that. And we'll pass over to VC mid-guest, but definitely a great segue into how SEDA was born after VC. If you want to dive in a little bit on yourself again, and for those that didn't catch your last episode, what's going on over at Socket?
I think
Your
there's something up
headphones
with
are
your
still
mic.
connected.
Yeah, I think your mic is still on your headphones.
The classic bundling. We'll go. Here he comes back in now. Yeah, do we have your VC?
Is this better or no?
That's
Way
perfect,
better.
man. Yeah.
Perfect. My bad. I was just saying, thanks for having me on. Super exciting conversations happen here like always, so I'm glad to be here. I'm Weber. I also go by VC, one of the founders here at Socket. Socket is the first chain abstraction protocol. What it means is we enable other applications and other protocols to get chain abstracted. We leverage this new technology, this sauce that we call MOFA, which is a modular order flow auction to enable applications to get chain abstracted. I'm sure we'll dive a little bit deeper into it. I think there are ways intent protocols can use the stuff. There are ways account abstraction protocols can use the stuff and whatnot. But yeah, super excited to dive into things that you guys have planned.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited to dive into it as well because I want to sort of paint the picture of how all three of these projects work together, because this week was a big week for all three of us and many other projects, with the roll-up releasing the chain abstraction ecosystem map, which gave everyone a really good idea of just how collaborative building for chain abstraction is and how it's an industry-wide necessity. So I really want to dive in later to paint that picture for everyone. But Jasper, maybe on the back of what Connor was saying around having a problem and solving a problem all in one is a pretty good segue to sort of speak about how SEDA came to be and your journey in Web3.
Sure thing. I'll try to make it really short. So me and my co-founder were building consumer apps. There were essentially no good apps or users, so we were thinking, okay, let's build a cool app. Then we were building an app, and we came to the conclusion, like, oh, the smart contracts that we're trying to build this on is actually inefficient, and Ethereum is expensive. So we went to another chain, built on Near, built a similar protocol. Then we're like, okay, now we need an Oracle to settle some of the applications, some of the markets in what we were building. And we're like, okay, so how hard can that be, right? Well, it took really, really long for any Oracle that till it launched there, and like we got a lot of promises and nothing really delivered. So we're like, okay, let's build our own Oracle. So then we built an Oracle, supported some chains that did not have Oracle support, but we kept seeing chains pop up, and came to the conclusion that this would be very, very hard to scale if you want to support all chains yourself. You essentially have to build like a BD and integration powerhouse, and you have to like hire an engineer to manage like every 2 networks at least, right? If not more. So it doesn't scale very gracefully. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with sort of like a technological solution where you have sort of like this hub and spokes model, if you will, where in the hub, all data is collected, people can issue new feeds, data gets aggregated onto this hub. And from there, it is distributable to any chain, and the state of the hub is provable on any chain. I think, the intents come into play with SEDA, as in a user says like, hey, I want this data and I want to execute it a certain way, but then it doesn't matter who actually queries that data and pushes it on chain, as long as you have like some economic guarantees or cryptographic guarantees. So the main concept is a user says like, hey, I want this data queried in a certain way. SEDA chain does something and the data just gets delivered, right? So this is sort of like the intent-based system. And this way we're able to scale to any chain. And we don't need to integrate at all. As long as you have a contract deployed on your chain that can parse our proofs, you have access to all of the data in the SEDA network.
It's a really good place to start, because SEDA, when I think about data request intents on SEDA, I think, okay, this is intent-based frameworks for developers, right? People who need to access these data to provide an experience. And then I look at what Enso is doing, and it's more like user intents, right? And then sockets in the middle making those things kind of happen. So just as a way to frame the conversation today, if we just go around just really quickly, Connor, we'll start with you. What is an intent to you?
Very simply, I have A and I want B, C, and D, and I don't care all the logical requirements to get that. And it's offset to other people to obtain that request for me.
And if anyone wants to further dive on that, jump onto, I think it's on your website. There's a really good YouTube video of you doing a presentation where you say exactly that, and it goes into it a little bit deeper. VC, what's an intent in your world?
I would stick with that, man. I think intent allow as a user for you to just define the end state and leave everything in the middle to off-chain actors, right? And that gives off-chain actors a lot of flexibility, which has its pros and cons. But you as a user, you can still dictate the end outcome, which is what ultimately matters.
Would you add or subtract anything, Jasper? Oops, sorry.
No. I mean, I think intent as a term is extremely broad, and I think that's fine. It's just like it covers a lot of ground, and what it does is quite powerful in its simplicity. What I'm wondering is sort of like, where do the challenges come in, right? Because essentially, if you boil it down, what an intent does is it sort of like puts the job of figuring out how to get to a certain state in the hand of specialized actors instead of people who don't really want to think about it, right? Like, to some extent, like, how would you guys sort of like, what are intents solving? And what are the real challenges here, right? Like, what are the new challenges that pop up? Because I know you have a pretty strong opinion about that, Connor.
Do I? Apparently I do. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's primarily about developer experience and user experience. Developers can now ship products very, very quickly. You know, if you want to interact with a DeFi protocol, let's say Beefy, you may need to interact with Aura and Balancer. And Uniswaps, you go into 4 different interfaces, doing maybe 10, 12 different transactions, including approvals. But in Tense, you can just express what you want, which is that beefy position. And all of those underlying interfaces are now abstracted away. All the individual integrations into each protocol is abstracted away. The routing is abstracted away. The metadata service, all of these individual smart contract integrations and also the audits now are also abstracted away. So it brings a multitude of different benefits, but really it's just focus on your product for developers and then users who get the most optimal route, and you can now integrate and interact with the protocols you want very, very quickly. On kind of the caveats of Intents, I think a lot of the Intents ecosystem, truthfully, might just be bullshit, minor language, but a lot of people just use it as a narrative and there's not much substance behind it as such, which also kind of creates a lot of confusion for this ecosystem. That's kind of one challenge in the Intents ecosystem. The second part is, okay, are we going to have centralized factors of these solvers and so forth? And I think we're going to have centralization in different parts of the stack always moving forward, and I think that's going to be part of it. But again, the prevalence of users being able to interact very seamlessly and developers being able to build products very quickly outweighs kind of the disadvantages of some degree of centralization, right? But it should also be made aware these centralized factors are just individuals or teams that then come together at a higher level that then coordinates between these people. So centralization, but decentralization of their proposals.
I like to push back on this element quite a bit, and I gave like a talk about this somewhere in last week. I don't really remember, and I'm planning to sort of like post about it more publicly at some point. But I think for some reason we think having one solver is centralized. I think it's more about the market being efficient, less about things being centralized in the traditional sense. So it's less about a question of the market being decentralized. It's more about the question of market being efficient, right? So I think I like to frame it more of a market thing rather than centralization or decentralization. I think people get a lot of like PTSD about security and whatnot when we frame it like centralization and decentralization, and that is totally not the case here. And even if it's about market efficiency, the intent sort of like give users levers to pull to protect themselves from market inefficiencies. If you think the market is not efficient on whatever intent protocol you're using, set lower slippage. So nothing bad can happen to you, right? And you're still always in control. If you think the market over this protocol is quite efficient, feel free to like set it higher and see what the market can get you, right? So I think intents are still like quite protocol, quite clean, quite lightweight. We still need to figure out how to build better markets, more efficient markets, reduce costs of participation for off-chain participants and whatnot. But yeah, I really like to frame it more as like a market efficiency, less like centralization and decentralization.
I think I really like that. And I do think decentralization only comes in when we're talking about whether this market is permissionlessly accessible by anybody or whether it is like whitelisted, right? Because then you get into censorship risk, which that's the only real concern here, right? Like other than that, the intents are supposed to be at least sort of tamper-proof. If done well. So I agree that security is less of a concern depending on like where the solver decides to route your tokens. This is another thing, of course, that there's a lot of discussion about. It's like with chain abstraction in general, it's sort of like what destination chain should be settlable and like who decides. In the end, probably the user. Is that a correct framing in your opinion? Like the decentralization doesn't matter as much, but maybe permissionlessness of the market does.
I would say that is also a little bit debatable. I think there have been like papers sort of like indicating that permissionless markets might not be as efficient in this case, and we would rather have like a more curated list, a more sort of like gated list doing this stuff, right? For example, like token gating might as well be a better way to do things here, right? So in like technically it's permissionless, just like Ethereum. If you have 32 ETH, you can join. But it still adds like some skin in the game before you're able to participate. If anyone can just like open up a laptop and just like compete, I think there are like cons to that. I haven't read that research paper, so I am not going to comment on it yet. But there are like a few studies sort of like indicating that permissionless marketplaces might also not be the best. But definitely we need censorship resistance for these markets to operate in a very neutral fashion. Yeah, I'm keen to hear, Connor, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of like what's live in production. So for me personally, I think the most powerful intent network as of today on same chain is definitely CowSwap. Most of the volume goes through there. Most of the top solvers are there. I think why this has worked very, very well for CowSwap is they have created this permissioned environment. What kind of permission environment also brings is you bring that coordination and also communication between the solvers and the team. You're creating this community inside of solvers, and we're learning from each other, we're sharing insights, we get to know each other. We have a monthly call with, CowSwap and so forth of what can be improved and so forth. This has, I think, about 18, 19, 20 different solvers, and they all bring a different benefit to this ecosystem as such. On the one end side, you've maybe got 5 solvers, 2 are controlled by themselves. It costs over $1 million of one inch token to participate. You can kind of see that this is not, even if it's permissioned, it's not permissioned that well in the way that maybe you should have more solvers. Maybe you should bring in DeFi. Maybe you should bring in different types of people that have different specialties. CowSwap have done this really, really well. On the Uniswap X approach, you've got this whitelisted / non-permissioned. I think it's 90% plus go to market makers, and then the rest get given to anyone that's willing to accept it. You can generally see there's only roughly about 5 people that are truly, truly participating in this. Then you've got kind of a cross for cross-chain intents, and that's kind of open for anyone. I think there's maybe 30, 35 people there. I do not think it's great to have it fully permissionless. I think it's better for the protocol, especially in the early stages, to get feedback, how to develop, how to build this community, how to build this resilience, because as we solve on many different networks, we see very quickly that if they're not calling their API, we need to have internal resources for supporting their changes. And because it's very, very quick and it's a new protocol, a lot of changes happen. And it's great to have that communication. Hey, we're thinking of this, so forth. This is what we're going to change. So we can kind of build this protocol together. Maybe it's just the psychology that we're building it with them, and we're actually just kind of giving them some advice here and there, but it's more inclusive. So I think in the long term, it should not be permissionless. It should not allow anyone to partake. Even if it was fully permissionless, the skill level of being able to be one of these participants is extremely high. You're looking minimum 5-6 months to become a solver that actually can have an impact. And yeah, I think this comment about centralization versus decentralization, I agree, right? I actually think the users, I think maybe there's some fanatics of decentralization in its ecosystem, and people will hold on to that for the rest of their life, but the users may just don't even care, right? So users, they go to MetaMask Swap and they pay 2% fees for this, or 1.25. They don't mind, right? That's going to centralized authorities in the background as well. So I think we maybe should get out of this perception that it all needs to be decentralized. It doesn't. Users want to get good routes. They want to interact with what they want to. And if somebody, a centralized authority, can give that to them, or a specialized authority to them, so be it.
I think it's a really good thing to speak about as well, right? Because what's our end goal here? Our end goal is to get more people to come into the space, right? To start using more applications. That's what we all need, right? We need users on the app layer. And if we hang on to this kind of narrative of complete decentralization, and that then damages the product experience at the beginning, right? Because you're talking about how you're communicating with your solvers and learning and upgrading, then that's a really good way to tackle this problem, right? Is like start with what's easy and going to be better for the user, and then we can work towards these frameworks in the long run.
I think what you don't want to lose sight of is users should always be able to not trust and verify. So as long as users are in full control of their end state, we can sort of like fuck around with the market and figure out a model that works best for the use case, right? So whitelist, token gated, fully permissionless, same chain, across chains, how you want to do things there. Do we want to open things up fully and whatnot? All of these things can be like figured out, but essentially users should always be in control of their end state, and users should be able to not trust and verify. So users should be able to opt out of these systems. There should be no lock-in, and users should be in full control of what happens with their funds, and they should have full transparency. I think as long as that happens, how the market structure operates, that can be iterative, and users don't have to worry about it, and can sort of like switch between things if they don't like a particular market structure, and sort of like give feedback for things to improve and whatnot. So I think, yeah, that's the way forward.
To add on to this, I would find it really, really interesting to do a survey of like people's thoughts versus reality. So let's say, for example, you were to say, if you were to use a decentralized, fully decentralized system, whatever that means, but you're paying 10% more to use it, would you still use it? Okay, maybe you've got, I don't know what percentage difference and so forth. And then you actually present this to the users and you go, now do a 1K trade, and you're going to pay an extra $100 to use a fully decentralized system, or a system that still proves that you're going to get what you want at the end. And maybe underneath you're using more centralized infrastructure, right? We all use AWS, Google Cloud, right? It's more in the background. What one would you do? And I think most users would actually choose, I want to get the better route, whether those caveats of the decentralized ethos is there or not. And to kind of add on to this, I find it very hard nowadays to pinpoint what's a fully decentralized system. Even Uniswap, right? If you go on their interface, that's not decentralized, right? That's hosted in a centralized infrastructure. They're using their own routing algos in the background. That's centralized, right? So I think we need to maybe come back to a bit of reality in this ecosystem of what's real and what's not, and what's just a theory, right?
I think that's a solid point. And one way to think about this is think about rollups and the sequencer, right? A lot of people talk about, we need decentralized sequencers. But really, like, the only way to decentralize a sequencer is by sort of like having some sort of like consensus, some sort of like chain there. And you will, as a user, sort of like pay for that cost, right? So your cost of like per transaction on L2 will definitely increase when that happens. Versus if you put like your intent hat on and you flip the model, what you get is competing sequencers. So not decentralized, but competing sequencers. So you still get all the good properties of having multiple sequencers, but now both of the sequencers, maybe like 2 or 3 or maybe even like 5. This is like permission to 5. These 5 sequencers are now sort of like bidding to sort of like get your transaction included on the rollup. So as a user, now you get a cheaper L2 execution than what you would get even in the current or in the future decentralized sequencer world. So, I mean, putting my intent hat on, we need competitive sequencers, not single and not decentralized sequencers.
I want to loop back on, you were saying, come back to reality a little bit, both of you, VC and Connor, were touching on this. I completely agree that, I've done this myself, I did it yesterday on my Twitter, that we blow out intents to what the reality of issuing intent is going to be like in Web3. Connor, can you maybe speak a little bit about, people think intents and they think it's just as easy as like issuing a command. Yesterday I compared it to, hey, Alexa, turn on my oven, and then Alexa makes sure that it turns on my oven. But BC, you were talking earlier about having this ability to still control some parameters, right? Like your slippage or whatever. So first iteration intents, what are they going to look like for the user? Or what do you see them looking like?
The user doesn't even need to know they're there. That's the most beautiful thing. I can talk about what's live already. Things have been live for a while, let's say if you're asking for kind of like the parameters and so forth, with Enso, it can be, I have token A and I want token B. This is the amount of token A that I want, that I have, and token B, this is the amount that I'm willing to accept. That's kind of your boundaries, right? So you can envision this as a more explicit intent. And you can kind of go down this path of, I have this token and I want to enter this lending protocol and I want to enter with this APY. So you can kind of create these boundaries in a way. Then you can kind of go down the semi-explicit. Hey, I want to enter in a lending protocol that has this APY, but you're not then stating what type of APY, what lending protocol the name is. So like, it's not Avi, it's not Compound, it's not Morpho, it's not Euler. You're just saying a lending protocol. Those itself will not be embedded inside of the intent network. Somebody won't be making the request in intent network that way. It'll be a tool built on top of the intent network. So we already have a tool called Brian Knows AI. It's a language model built on top of Enso, where users can actually do text to actions. And underneath, they're converting that into what they're interpreting the user request and then call Enso underneath. So you are going to still need to have some of these definitions and how to structure this, how to present this. I think every single protocol, rightly or wrongly, are going to have their own way, right? People are going to make their own request formats for Enso, maybe these other protocols that spawn up. And then you're going to have tools that leverage all of them together on top. And maybe they create like a unified layer that you just make a request to them to then go to all of them itself. I think the people that are saying you can do everything and anything with intents, again, I think is just bullshit. And I think it's just narrative hunting with not much substance behind it. But again, intents are real. They are currently in the ecosystem and people use them day to day and they don't even know they're using them.
Yeah, I think this is one of the tough things, or like the harder things about intents. Like I find them to be like quite hard to generalize, while keeping the property that we really, really want. Users should not need to trust, and users should be able to verify. I don't have the perfect answer to it. I think it is pretty hard to find like a good middle ground. Maybe we just end up doing, I think there was this comment someone made earlier, I think last week, maybe swaps are the generalized intent, and that's the best we can get, or maybe corner things elsewhere.
What does the word generalized mean to you?
I think people sort of like want the ability to, let's say, buy an NFT with their ERC20. And sort of like, build like different intentful applications. I think that's what people usually mean by generalized intents.
I don't think it's just token swaps. For me, it's any smart contract that lives on chain.
Right.
Like, you all know yourself, your developers currently or previously. If you're building a smart contract integration into other smart contracts, there are certain state requirements to be fulfilled to be able to interact with it. For me, that's kind of an abstraction of the intent. Like I want to obtain the outcome from this smart contract that maybe requires the state from this smart contract first. So the intent request is that, but then this is abstracted away. So I do see it more going, and again, I don't like the word choice of generalized because it's really, really hard to, hold on to and create some substance. But for me, it's the smart contract outcomes.
Right.
I do see that moving forward. We saw with ourselves, it was like swaps, then it went into DeFi. Now we have people wanting to go into NFTs using Enso. We've even got some people saying, hey, I want to get the outcome of this smart contract can I express this inside of Enso? So, I kind of see this as a layer that lives on top of all the chains itself.
Yeah.
People to interact with it easily.
Yeah, basically that's exactly what I'm saying, right? It is a super hard problem, but a very valuable problem to solve. And I'm bullish teams that are sort of like trying and sort of like getting us there. I think maybe what the structure actually ends up looking like is that people sign on to, let's say, sort of like a state hash that they want to achieve. And in the message that they sign, there is, let's say, a security key that sort of like indicates the settlement property somehow. So users can now see the end state they want to achieve and also specify like different security parameters they want the off-chain actors to sort of like take care of. I mean, and maybe that is the lever. We will need to find the right sort of like standardization here, such that it's like generalized enough, while also giving users enough levers to control and whatnot. It is a really valuable and hard problem to solve, which makes it quite exciting.
Because the problem here lies in the conditions to fulfill intent, right? It doesn't lie in the actions the intent wants to do. It lies in the sort of like making sure the conditions were actually met before the transaction was fired. And it's hard because those conditions, by the time the settlement network checks the conditions, might have changed, right? So you get into these weird edge cases where you need to pick the conditions really well to make sure you get sort of like this deterministic outcome, or people need to build more intent-aware applications, I guess, is also something we still need to see, right? Like these things are pretty new, and I feel like they're mostly used as tape to sort of like fix fragmentation, but soon they'll be really part of the applications that are being built from the ground up, and I think that's pretty exciting. Like it was the same with DeFi. People built DeFi not thinking necessarily about composability, and then all of a sudden there was composability, and you had like all these weird interactions that people didn't necessarily expect, and then all the later DeFi protocols are all built with composability in mind, right? Like as we go and learn about these things and these sort of like network effects, I feel like the next generation of applications always sort of like lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on these opportunities in the space.
I mean, that was like the whole purpose of Ethereum, right? Like that's why I fell in love with it in 2016, was like somebody could build a smart contract, their isolated product. I could build one and then intertwine. But everyone was creating these silos and not communicating until DeFi summer. It's interesting. Yep. It took literally 4 or 5 years for the ecosystem to realize you can communicate smart contracts with each other. And that was kind of the beauty of Ethereum.
And then it took 2 years to mess it all up, and now we're fragmented, and everybody's building app chains, and they cannot communicate.
Now we all build blockchains instead, right?
Yeah.
One thing I found very interesting, the way this format should be, I don't think the users should ever, or the user or developers should ever define the validation mechanism to ensure that the outcome has been obtained. So for example, let's say you want to get this token output, right? Very simple case. The network should know underneath that to do that validation, you need to do a balance off check, right? You need to check that in the call data that's been generated to validate, right? A few intent networks I see require the developers to add not only the outcome, but then how to validate this outcome has been done. I think this should be abstracted away, right? Like that's going to make more difficulty for developer journeys. The way that,
Yeah, I think it's good to make it as sort of like configurable as possible, and then build SDKs and wrappers, right? Because you're saying the protocol should be aware of like essentially an enum of like multiple settlement mechanisms or settlement types or conditions, where then at that point you're actually already almost building your own domain specific language. So it kind of ends up being similar, I think, no matter if you.
Yeah, I think it's just more usability for people to use the network.
Definitely.
That's what we've done, right? So we've said, let's say somebody wants to have the smart contract abstraction contributed in the Enso network. Not only do they need to add how to execute, but how to also validate that execution has been done properly. And then whatever it gets generated, each individual contract call that's been combined validators will look at that validation mechanism and then run it through all the state that's been generated to then make sure that that outcome has been done itself. So for us, it's purely just giving those developers an easier journey than caring about all those underlying caveats, right?
For sure.
Then if they need to do that, they may as well have just built the smart contract integrations, to be honest. They may as well, because now they need to learn what's the individual function signatures to then verify that, what's the potential impact.
No, it's super difficult. I just think that building it in a way where somebody could come along and do it, but it's not expected or doesn't need to do it. It's like there's still like toolboxes or an SDK that they can use that has it included in a more readable form. But I think that having sort of like the programmability of these settlement conditions is pretty good.
I've got one. Sorry, we'll just add on to this and then we can move on. I've got a better idea. Not that people do it themselves, but people contribute to a marketplace. So you can envision this as like a module marketplace for validating state. And then all of us could contribute there. And then there's independent parties like validators that are then running all of these modules in the outcome. I think that would actually be a better thing. Yeah, we thought about this a lot because we built Temper, the simulation tool, about a year ago, like HouseHub uses it in production, Gelato, Yearn, Gnosis Pay, any other projects. And why we thought about this was ERC 3074. So it's delegated call from EOAs into contracts instead of like EOA into a smart account into a contract. Because the attack vector of the call data being generated needs to be simulated to make sure that it's not malicious. And then if you go the layers down, you're like, who's simulating? So it's a centralized authority, it's Temper, or it's Tenderly, right? Maybe I hijacked them, right? What's the proofs that they haven't been hijacked and somebody said, hey, yeah, that does pass the simulation. So then you need to have a decentralized network of validators using this module marketplace of state validation pretty much. Yeah, we thought about it a lot. We were even like, did we do an AVS and eigenlayer just for this use case if account abstraction was going to die, right? From 3074.
I feel like if we sort of like keep this space going for like 2 more hours, we'll basically solve intents. A really good conversation, and like there is a reason why we ended up building like MOFA, because it gives developers exactly this. It gives developers and users the ability to sort of like define modular proof systems and like how you want to settle and sort of like standardize it to the user. But yeah, I think we should talk about that later.
So when I first started diving into intents, which is maybe 3 or 4 months ago with Jasper, I kind of got this idea. The comparison that was made was like, right now, we're managing our transactions, cross-chain transactions, step by step. Like we're trying to bring users in, and then there's this wall of education because they have to do there's so many touch points to just doing a transaction that when they were doing like a Web 2 finance application just doesn't exist, right? But when I'm listening to you guys talk, are we just moving the step-by-step things to like creating a set of instructions at the front? Like you still need to have, we're not just wiping education out of Web 3, right? It very much sounds like intents as they are now are really only relatable to people who still know how to use Web 3. Is the end goal...
It's just, the goal is not to make it so that a user can speak to their phone and send $1 million, right? The goal is to give developers the tools to build sort of like cross-chain complex smart contract interactions without having to be able to write Solidity code. Or be able to like read call data, right? Like there's like a whole bunch of people that are just being completely, like a bunch of very talented developers that are not able to build in the space just because it's too complex. And intents removes a lot of the complexity. And yes, there is still attributes that you need to add to an intent for security purposes, but in the end, it's much more simplistic than anything because you're outsourcing the complexity to specialized solvers. Yeah. And that's really how you should see it. Like you take app developers that need to have like a super, super, super deep understanding of smart contracts, Solidity, and EVM. And you basically say, hey, you guys don't need to think about this at all anymore. we have like this specialized group of people that will essentially figure it all out, but you can configure it in a way that your users don't get screwed over. And that to me is the power of intent.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think every team building in like the current world, let's say I have like really good like 10 Solidity developers, right? I'm paying them $500,000 every year because they're really, really good. And these people end up teams end up becoming like sweatshops doing integrations instead of actually doing like valuable protocol work. So intents allow us to like sort of like unbundle this, have sweatshops doing integrations, have like, a talented protocol developers building these intent markets, and sort of like have them work together and sort of like win-win. So it like this like unbundling of like teams and different sort of like developers who are good at different things to be able to work together. I think that's what intent enables.
We're able to bundle the chains by unbundling
devs and
process.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
But what do you see as the end goal here? Because Jasper has a really good point, right? But the experiences that we can now get with technology that's outside of Web3, whatever it might be, your Alexis, your Series, your Ubers, ordering pizzas online, these are all forms of intents, right? That people become very familiar. And this is like to speak to our generations coming through now, like the lazier the experience, the better, right? They want to do less for the outcome. Can we get there?
Even in those, even with an Uber, you still accept the fare. That's your slippage, essentially, or like your swap rate. You still have to enter your destination, right? Make sure it's correct, maybe move it a little bit, right? There's still like some attributes that need to be set on your intent, if you want to call them that, even in Web2 apps, right? So I think the closer we get to mimicking that, where now the intent just says, hey, I want asset B. Well, the app cannot guess that, so you need to input that somehow. And then I want to pay a maximum of this for it, is also something that the app cannot know, right? Like, so I think that you minimize the user inputs to just the bare things. And I think that's where we're going now with Web3. And that's very exciting. It's a great time to build.
That is a really good example, because if you think about it, before we had like Google Maps and like, Uber and whatnot, people would have these maps. And if you want to go from chain A to chain B, you would be like, oh, hey, I'm going to, sorry, I said chains, but like state A to state B. You would sort of like have this, you would sort of like make these like little circles on the map. Okay, I'll go to this city, I'll take this highway, and I'll like do all of this. Versus now, you're just like, put it on your Google Maps. It reroutes you in real time, depending on traffic and whatnot. Or you can just do Uber. And now you don't even have to like think about like anything that's like happening. So you went from like a physical map and you sort of like drawing circles, ending up in like a deserted town where you will probably get carjacked or something, to this like really intelligent system that sort of like figures it out.
I completely agree with everything that's been said. The only thing I would add on top of this is one other comparison, not only to Google Maps, Uber, so forth. I also see a bit more like Figma. So you've got these really talented designers, and they create reusable components. And there's Figma marketplaces. You can go and I can take, VC's creations of these designs that are for a mobile website related to, I don't know, selling mouses, right? And I can take this information, combine it with mine, and then create something new, right? But that ability for me to go somewhere that somebody's already abstracted that creation or that understanding process away, to then take pieces all together to combine something new, I think is really, really powerful of intent, right? And you can envision this like process of trying to figure out how to go from A to B or whatever it may be, is that creation process inside of these components and designs of Figma. Now, what that actually results in is brand new products that will be created in this ecosystem that we actually don't know just yet. And how do we not know this just yet? Because it's been so hard for teams to build products. I think people know I'm like product beats paper. I think it's a lot better to ship products, learn from people and so forth, right? I think one of the major challenges is we haven't had this reusability, this combinations of abstractions and so forth, to just sit on a weekend and ship a product over a weekend, and go, wow, that's a good product. You can't do that in Web 2 world. There's people that are running like really, really positive revenue companies from purely a weekend, but they just ship it, boom, they use all these different tools and they bind it together. Web 3 land is integrate everything yourself, maintain everything yourself, and then also wait for audit slots. And you're looking months before it. And most of the time, people have lost the market opportunity at that point in time, and they just launch a token to launch a token, right? But with intents, you're using and combining all of these abstractions together to build something new, something innovative that we don't know just yet.
I love that. It reminds me of this, there was the Lex Friedman, Jeff Bezos interview, which was really good, in which he said that his goal with Blue Origin is to build such good infrastructure that 2 students in their dorm room could build a space exploration company over like a weekend, essentially, right? And what we're doing, with all due respect, is not fucking rocket science. So it should be it should be much, much easier to achieve that in crypto. And I think we're getting closer. One other thing, Matt, you asked like, where is this going, right? So I was thinking about my answer because I wasn't very happy with it. Like, oh, we're just going to be able to build Web 2 applications. That's not, I think the cool thing here is actually to touch on what Connor just said about the composability that sticks through intents, where now permissionlessly anybody could come and build a ride-sharing aggregator, right? Because let's say there is a decentralized Uber, but you also have decentralized Lyft. I find it really annoying to have to check prices or like check availability or make sure I get two at the same time and cancel the one that is slower than the other one, essentially, right? I bet the drivers also find that annoying. So if you can build an experience where you can aggregate all of that composably and permissionlessly into like one application that will always pick the best solver or route or whatever, or rideshare, I think that will just create the best consumer applications, get the biggest moat, therefore just win. And I had actually not thought about that before, so thanks, guys.
And one thing, I mean, like, just to add on this, like, humans want convenience. You know, like, why all these products have been so useful, like Maps, Uber, all these ride sharing, it's convenience. They pay for convenience. As if I'm not a human being. We're all human, you know, like you pay for convenience, and the Web3 ecosystem has made that super hard for people to even pay for the convenience. So if you're a new user coming along and I need to go to Crack and do this offshore deposit into MetaMask, withdraw. I only wanted to enter with this protocol. Now I need to go to 4 different interfaces. You know, there's no convenience element, and kind of chain abstraction, the oracles, the intents, all combined together for people to build these consumer apps for convenience. And that's kind of what people want. They don't want to care about all these individual parts.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing about intents for me as well. You get to increase the convenience without decreasing user control or custody and all of the don't trust, verify elements of Web3. So it's like the perfect fit. Intents for me are the most fluid access delegation mechanism. Users can just be like start state, end state, and control it.
Keep in mind that you want to go, Jasper? I'm the only non-developer in this conversation. So when I hear you guys speaking, I think, all right, great. We're getting to a point in Web3. I'm in marketing, right? So like narratives and things are super important to my job. We get to this point in Web3 that we're going to be building as easy as it is to build Web 2, right? Connie saying like you can ship over the weekend. We're coming to that point. The original narrative when I joined Web 3 was kind of like sell decentralization, sell ownership, you know, all this kind of stuff. I don't think that narrative is going to stick. When we have the same ability to build the same applications in Web 2, I'm very interested to hear from you guys who've been in the space for a very long time. What do you think the selling point is going to be? Because if we have the tools to build things that feel just like Web 2, what's the big draw card to come into a Web3 application, which will just be called an application at that point, I'm sure?
So it's a useful product. It doesn't need to be related to Web3 at all, personally. Like, I joined this space on a more cyberpunk, self-sovereignty, building an application nobody could bring down. You know, that's kind of where I joined. And, you know, 2017, a trend was bank the unbanked, you know, all this full decentralization, blah, blah, blah. That's how I look at it nowadays, to be truthfully honest. We need products that people want to use. We can talk about this infra, we can talk about account abstraction, we can talk about self-custody. Like, okay, cool. So you're going up to somebody in the street, saying, hey, we're using this AWS Kubernetes cluster, and that's why you should use our product. You go, what's your product? Oh, it's a Kubernetes cluster, but there's this other thing on top. It's like, no, what's your product? So I really think this narrative of decentralization, I think we should always have the ethos of decentralization, but understand that the space is not going to move forward if we just hold on to ideologies that don't result in people to use this technology. Like, it should be products that people want, not the tech. My vision of this whole ecosystem is literally the concept of blockchain will just be abstracted away. It should not even be part of a selling point of a product, man. To say we're built on blockchain. No, like, this is a product. Maybe if you go deep inside and you're like, oh, cool, there's blockchain being used underneath, but it's not the main reason you used it. So what does the benefits of blockchain bring? And that's what you should be presenting to the user. Hey, you still have all of access to funds if this bank or whatever goes down, right? Okay, that's great. So I don't get bankrupt if a bank goes in bankruptcy as well, right? So for me, it's purely about just shipping products, and people need to see value in the products that are being spawned from this ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's the way I look at it as well. We gotta like preserve I think the right mental model for this is, okay, like, blockchains are great, but the cost of decentralization or like, using a chain is like too fucking high. You need to understand N different chains. You have 10 different assets everywhere. You need to bridge and whatnot, like we got to reduce that to a very low level. Users don't need to like figure out N different things before they can start using this stuff, while also preserving don't trust verify. No sort of like, there is no Uber, there is no Instagram, there's no Facebook that can fuck you up. So I think that is like primarily why I'm like very bullish intents, chain abstraction and whatnot, because they preserve the core sort of like reason why we are doing this, while decreasing the cost of like, users interacting with these systems. And this will sort of like get us closer to sort of like getting mass adoption, PMF, in like the real world, and onboard like real people to these systems who can actually use these systems and look at these systems in a way that, okay, this is, let's say, like Facebook, but without giving them ability to fuck me up, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that, because I really feel that the last like 3 years in the space, we've been fighting for things to talk about and try to give them meaning. I think, Connor, you were alluding to this at the start of the conversation, right? And there's just not a lot of substance behind it. And we have to hang on to these and create stories out of everything, But it seems like intents are really kind of going to be the catalyst to make you the hero of the story, the app experience, right? From a user POV.
I think it's part of the story, man. I think is, the Oracle side, the chain abstraction, intents, I think all combining together. Like, we had a project built on top of Enso that we didn't even know. They combined like account abstraction, automation, and intents all in one product, and they shipped it within 2 weeks, right? That's useful. So I think it's us all building these tools, combining together, I think is for me personally, is more valuable than just intents. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I think the general direction here, though, is from like the adoption point of view of the PMF is a product, right? Product beats paper. You've been screaming it on the Twitter. Jump into the Enso Discord. It's been the theme for a couple of weeks, and I'm very excited to see that happen. We're going to wrap up next to the end of the hour, and I know if you have some hard stops. That was a great discussion. We dove deeper than I thought one could dive into Enso in the middle. So really enjoyed that. Looking forward to running the wrap on this space. Connor, VC, Jasper, thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks everybody.
Nice.
Thanks for hosting, Matt.
As always, we'll be back next week, Ep 4, with special guests. Stay tuned. Can't remember. Yeah, we've got a cross next week, which is going to be amazing. We're going to be talking cross and Everclear, so we're going to be going through the whole stack from application layer all the way down to clearing and settlement. So join in next week for that. Thank you all again. See you in a week.
Ciao.
Ciao, guys.